So my question in this particular theme is very much in the spirit of this question. And I understand from the report that, and the statements made, that there were no actual or verifiable conflicts of interest in the Ridout transactions made by the two ministers. That said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to hear directly from the two ministers, Shanmugam and Balakrishnan, if on hindsight, whether there are specific actions that they undertook that they now believe, at the very least, could be perceived as a conflict of interest, keeping in mind that we operate as public servants and perceptions are very important for public figures, and especially since the Ministerial Code of Conduct, of course, includes this more stringent qualification.
I thank Mr. Lim for this question. I think it's an important question, and it's at the heart of a lot of misunderstanding, even from lawyers. Actual conflict. I think I'm glad to hear Mr. Lim and others agree there is no actual conflict. But just so that we understand what it means, actual conflict is you have an interest and you make a decision. We all agree that wasn't there. From what I hear from the members, there was no potential conflict either, because I recused myself. Potential conflict, as I explained, arises when you have an interest and you may potentially make a decision. Members agree from what they are saying that there was no potential conflict. They accept the conclusions of the reports on that. The confusion arises on perceived conflict. And let me explain what is at the heart of the confusion. When you talk about conflict, what are you talking about? You are talking about someone in conflict. There is an interest on one side and there is a duty on the other side. If one of those don't exist, there is no conflict. If there is no actual conflict, no potential conflict, what does perceived conflict in this context mean? It seems to me, in essence, the essence of Mr. Lim's questions and some of the other questions, including Ms. Lim's question, is that if others perceive you to be in conflict, therefore you are in conflict, and therefore you are in breach of the ministerial code. It doesn't matter that you took no part in it. It doesn't matter that you recused yourself. It doesn't matter that the matter was decided perfectly properly. As long as a member of the public or anyone else can take the view that you are in perceived conflict, you are in conflict. Now, you can't run any government on that basis. Let me give you some examples. Minister for Health goes to a hospital for knee replacement. The hypothetical example. He goes to a hospital, knee replacement. He is not in actual conflict. He is not asking them to charge him anything less. Otherwise, Prime Minister will ask CPIB to look at it. He is not bringing forward his surgery ahead of others against medical advice. That could be abuse of power. But someone can say, you are the Minister of Health. You appoint or you have a say in appointing the CEOs. You are the person who decides on the structure and in some ways, their career progress. They might treat you better than they might treat others, and therefore you are in perceived conflict. Can a government work on this basis? That it's entirely up to a subjective viewpoint on perception, perceived conflict? Or Minister for Home Affairs, in a personal capacity, goes to file a police report. Can someone say, well, that creates a perceived conflict of interest because you are in charge, ultimately, of the police force. And they might, therefore handle the investigations differently, and therefore there is a perception of conflict. In anything dealing with that report, the minister must recuse himself. He must have no part to play. He must treat himself as a private citizen, and the matter must be handled by others appropriate within the police and the ministry. I can give you a string of examples. Minister for Education, his son applies to a school which has some discretion whether to admit children or not. Is he in a perceived conflict of interest? No, I thought about it. The reason why we are ranked as highly as we are, and the reason why this government is not corrupt, is because we take these things seriously. Ministerial code of conduct doesn't mean you get to absurd results. It's got to have common sense, it's got to be the spirit, it's got to be the letter, and it's got to be applied sensibly and properly, but rigorously. What is the perceived conflict? Can someone explain to me? Rather than just repeating the word, what is the perceived conflict? I mean, in essence, strip it of all these legalese that people use. In essence, what is being said is, if you are in charge of a ministry, you must not engage in any transaction which is available to public citizens. That's in essence what's being said. If that is so, that's a new principle. Because some people may perceive you to be in conflict. But that's not the principle in the code. That's my answer to Mr. Lim. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
So just the clarification is that for Minister Shanmugam, on hindsight, that there are no perceived conflicts of interest in his mind that he would have otherwise corrected.
In my mind, there was a possibility of a potential or perceived conflict of interest. I didn't think there was going to be any actual conflict of interest because, as I said, rentals don't come up to Ministry of Law. But there is a potential conflict of interest if I remain in the chain of command. So that was very much in my mind, which is why I went and took this step. And the way this government operates, Senior Minister Teo, previously in charge of the Public Service Division, knows all about how our rules operate. And that is why I went to him and said, if this comes up, can Indrani come to you? In fact, I could have left it with Indrani. Our people are honorable, competent. Indrani could have dealt with it herself. But I didn't even want to take that chance. I wanted to make sure that there was somebody more senior than me who can have a say in the matter if it came up. So yes, the answer is yes, it was in my mind, which is why I took the steps that I took.